We are doing our monthly Mishna Brura Dirshu review from chapters 275 all the way through to 285. And we'll, as usual, get through as much of it as we can in the time that we have. The first principle, so the first chapter, 275, is dealing with the use of a candle on Shabbat. As I mentioned, between Mincha and Ma'ariv, the real question is, what can you do with a candle that will not create a concern that you are going to end up adjusting this candle on Shabbat? Because obviously if you adjust a candle on Shabbat, that's a chilul Shabbat. And the rabbis made a rule that you can't use a candle in such a way that you're going to end up adjusting it on Shabbat, so that there's a realistic chance, a good chance that you're going to end up adjusting it on Shabbat. Now there's two other things over here. The one is, when I say candle, I don't mean what we think of as a wax candle only. I also mean a lamp, like an Aladdin's lamp. That was their main kind of candle. So we'll see about the wax candle again in a second. Now, there are several factors that affect this. One factor is, what are you doing with this light? Is it a very intense kind of thing that you're doing that needs scrutiny, reading an unfamiliar text? Or is it something that's really pretty easy to differentiate? You know, you're separating black clothes and white clothes, that you really don't need very good light for that. It's pretty clear to see, as long as there's a minimum of light. That's one factor. Another factor is there somebody else monitoring or supervising you, or are you on your own? If you're on your own, then we are much less likely to permit you. But if there's somebody else watching you, taking care of you, then we say, well, then probably they're going to make sure that you don't do it. So that's the second factor. A third factor is, are we dealing with a wax candle or an Aladdin's lamp? An Aladdin's lamp, you are more likely to end up adjusting it. A wax candle, you are less likely to end up adjusting it. The next factor is, are you a dignified person or an undignified person? Are you someone who's prepared to get your hands dirty? If you are prepared to get your hands dirty, then it is more likely that you're going to end up adjusting this lamp. If you're the kind of person who never gets your hands dirty, you always have people to do that for you, so then you are less likely to end up adjusting the lamp. So those are four of the factors. There's one or two others. Another one will be, is it Yom Kippur or not Yom Kippur? Because if it's Yom Kippur, you have much more of a consciousness and awareness of everything that you do, but the rest of the year, not as much. So we'll see some of those other factors, but those are really the key dynamics. How much good light do you need? Is there somebody else watching you? All these factors around, is this the kind of thing that you are likely to do? So the Shulchan Aruch says, you don't delouse clothing or read a book by candlelight. Even if you're just reading with your eyes, not saying that we're not reading aloud, because we're worried you might tilt the candle, and even if it's quite high up that you wouldn't be able to reach it, because the rabbis did not differentiate based on height, and therefore, even if it's like set inside the wall or something like that, that's all still problematic. And says the Shulchan Aruch, it's also a problem if we're talking about a wax candle. However, the Mishnah Brura quotes some of the Achronim, some of the later halachic authorities, who start off by saying, Nahagu lahakel. We have the custom, the common practice is that we are lenient when it comes to a wax candle. So as Theo and I had a discussion this week, there's the theoretical halacha and the practical halacha. In theory, the Shulchan Aruch says, I don't like it. However, they said people do it. So it must be that there are reasons why we are allowed to do it.
But they don't like it.
So they don't like it, but this is what's done. So he goes in through, the back and forth, that really wax candles are far more stable. It's not so likely you're going to end up adjusting them, and other things like that. So then they say, but still it's better if you don't. But then the Mishnah Brura says, okay, but in the last 300 years, between those commentaries and the Mishnah Brura himself, there have been substantial improvements in candle manufacturing. And our candles today are actually far better, and everyone would agree that those are not so problematic. So he goes into that, but basically with the wax candle, it's not so problematic. Again, there still may be other opinions, but that's basically the conclusion. So most of the rest of this chapter is not so relevant for us. Firstly, we use electric lights 90% of the time. Secondly, for the 10% of the time when we're not using electric lights, we're using wax candles, which the Mishnah Brura concludes is okay. So that's basically all we need to know. This siman is not really halakha l'maaseh, is not really practical halakha for us anymore. Nonetheless, it's still Torah, and the test will still be on it as well. So we'll go through it pretty briefly, and then we'll go into the next one. So the next factor, he says, if you've got two people reading the same book, you don't have to worry, because if one goes to adjust the candle, the other one will alert him. But if they're reading two different books, or if they each read, they're each doing their own thing, even if they're both reading the same book, but from different copies of the book, that's no good. And when it comes to saying unfamiliar prayers in shul, some people like to stay at shul late, saying extra prayers, but it would be like piyutim. It would be prayers that are not very well known or not very commonly said. You're not allowed to do that, because these prayers that you don't know very well, again, you're going to be going up to the candle to look at. If somebody's sitting with you and you say to them, please keep an eye on me and make sure that I don't end up adjusting the candle, then that's absolutely fine. If it's somebody who doesn't get their hands dirty, then that's also fine, because they're not going to end up turning the candle by mistake. The only thing they might do is call in someone to do it for them, and that's not going to end up being, that's not going to happen. The person's not going to do it, so it's not going to end up being problematic. Then he says, when it comes to a bonfire, we worry about that as well, because you could end up adjusting and changing things on the bonfire, so we don't like that either. If you're reading from like a bigger flame. Then he says school children can read by candlelight, can study by candlelight, because as long as they know that the rule in the classroom is that the children are not allowed to adjust the candles, then we're not concerned, because they're not going to do it. They're worried they're going to get into trouble. The analogy I would give for this, you have some classrooms where only the teacher has the air conditioner control. Right? And if any of the students would get up and try and mess around with the air conditioner control, they'd get in trouble. Now, I'm not saying every classroom's like that, I'm using this as an analogy. So if you know that you're not allowed to mess with the air conditioner control, even if you're feeling uncomfortable, you won't do it, because you're disciplined and you understand that you've got to keep the rules. So that is the same kind of thing when it comes to this. The children, it's okay, because they would know that they're not allowed to move the candles. So even if the teacher isn't in the classroom, since that's the rule that the teacher has set, we are confident that they won't break the rule. Another interesting one, you are allowed to study the chapter of Bameh Madlikin by the light of Aladdin's lamp, because when you're studying about how you're not allowed to tilt the lamp, you're not going to end up tilting the lamp, right? It would be the same thing to study this chapter 275 by the light of a candle. The whole thing is about precautions that we take in order not to accidentally turn the candle. So that would certainly apply here as well. You are allowed to do Yom Kippur davening to the light of the candle, even though that's not so familiar, because people have a real consciousness and a real awareness of Yom Kippur. Pesach night that falls on Shabbat, are you allowed to read the Haggadah by candlelight? Yes, because everybody knows the Haggadah, more or less. It's true that some people don't know all the details, it's true that some people need their memories jogged, but everybody knows the Haggadah. I mean, there's nobody, says the Shulchan Aruch, so ignorant as to not know the Haggadah. Now, sorry? Yeah. That's what he says. I'll just read you the words. Ein ama aretz shelo teshekur b'fiv k'tzat. There is no ignoramus who doesn't have it a little bit off by heart. So it doesn't flow from his mouth very easily. Now the Mishnah Brura says, okay, but what if there is? Right? What if there is such an ama aretz? So he says, firstly, if he's at a Seder, so presumably there are other people around, and he should say to somebody, keep an eye on me, that I don't end up adjusting the candle by mistake. And number two, saying the Haggadah is a Torah mitzvah, and this concern not to tilt the candle is a rabbinic concern that you might come to. So this rabbinic concern was never made to negate a Torah mitzvah. But as I said, not so relevant to us. We're using electricity, and even if we're using wax candles, the Mishnah Brura is fine with our wax candles. I remember seeing, we've got these books in the library, Halachic Positions of Rav Soloveitchik. And I remember in one of those rulings, Rav Soloveitchik also said how wax candles are exempt from this concern. Okay? Then he says the teacher is allowed to prepare his classes by candlelight, but because he's a teacher for these things, he knows the material and he doesn't need to, again, it's not going to require intense study. He's going to recognize where he needs to begin and end and whatnot. You're not allowed to separate, for example, clothes that appear very similar. So I mentioned between black and white, you can do that with this light, but not between black and navy, because there you really are going to need a good light that you're going to want to tell the difference. So that's too close. Even though it's not reading, that's too close. The next rule we have is if you've got your waiter or your servant, your house servant, let's say that he's Jewish. So your butler is a better example. You say to your butler, I want you to please put out the glasses for our guests, and he's a new butler. So you say to him, the Shabbat glasses, not the weekday glasses, right? Or the blue crystal glasses, not the green crystal glasses. He's a new butler, he doesn't know where everything is. So you're not allowed to give him that kind of instruction, because he's going to need good candlelight to see, and he might end up making the mistake. However, if he's an old butler, if he's been around for years and years, he knows exactly where everything is. So then he doesn't need such careful light. He doesn't need such precise light. He's able to just work it out in minimal light. Then we're not so concerned about it. Now, yes, butler's Jewish, yeah. If he's not Jewish, then it's less of a concern. We're going to see more of that in the next chapter. The next point is, this is an interesting one. It's interesting mainly because of the halachic attitude that's present over here. So you've got your Jewish butler he's been around for years. He knows exactly where to go to get which kind of clothes and whatever else, to get which glasses. However, the candle here is an oil lamp. It's got olive oil. So don't give him an olive oil lamp to go and check, because we are concerned that he might take some of the olive oil to use as salad dressing. Now, we've seen that before, this concern about using the olive oil as salad dressing. And again, it sounds a little odd to us, but imagine, if there were batteries made out of chocolate. That's the analogy, right? You give somebody this device with batteries made out of chocolate, and he knows if he has a little nibble, the device will still work. However, you're cutting short its life. Okay. Now, according to the basic halakha, are you allowed to give the butler the olive oil lamp? The battery is made of chocolate. According to the halakha, the answer is yes, you're allowed to. However, says the Shulchan Aruch, you mustn't. You mustn't. Because maybe he'll end up. So he says, Ein morin lo livdok, afal pi shehu mutar. Don't go and tell him to check with this oil lamp, even though it's permissible to check with the oil lamp, because maybe he's going to end up taking from it. So this is what's known as halakha va'ein morin kain. The halakha is this, but we don't teach the halakha, because that halakha is too lenient, and if you teach the lenient halakha, people are going to get funny ideas. Right? So that's an interesting principle in halakha. This is the basis. It seems not necessarily. This is the basis of an example of what's called halachic policy. Halachic policy means, yes, according to the letter of the law, it's permissible. However, it's forbidden, because we can see where it's going to go, and we can see the harm that will come from this, and we're not prepared to allow that to happen. So that's the idea of halachic policy. Who had their hand up? Sam.
What happens if you just say, go find, say, my shirt, and he happens to take the olive oil candle?
You're saying there are a few options there, whatever else. Look, we're not going to go into all the details, because it's not a practical halachic section, as I mentioned. We've got wax candles and electricity. Yeah, you've got to use your seichel in the situation. But the basic idea is that, the basic point that I wanted to make is that really this is mutar. Really, this is not a halachic problem. However, it's a halachic policy problem. Give you another example. I gave a shiur in Durban once. I was speaking about milk and meat. So I was saying, according to the Torah, it's only if milk and meat are cooked together. So a salami sandwich with cheese on top is not a violation of the Torah. It's a rabbinic violation. And then on the basis of that, I explained several halachic things. So Abba Zekri came up to me afterwards and he said, halakha v'ein morin kain. Right? What you said is correct, but don't go and say that to people. Don't tell people that you're not breaking the Torah if you have salami and cheese. Right? It's fine if they have the impression that that's forbidden by the Torah, because then they're not going to do it. So that's an example over here. Now, they're not analogous because the one is, not full disclosure, whatever else, but he says that's the idea. Okay, chapter 276, this is much more practical. This is really the one about a person who is not Jewish doing melacha for you on Shabbat. So this, in fact, is one of the most practical and important sections in all of the laws of Shabbat. I want to point out here two things. One is this is not the only chapter that deals with this. The other one is chapter Shin Zayin, 307, which deals with a lot of what instructions you're allowed to give and what you're not allowed to give. So that's point number one I want to make. And point number two, and this is also not well understood, there are two entirely separate factors. One is, what can you say to a non-Jew on Shabbat? And the other is, what can be done for you? Or what, God bless you, what work, malacha, can you benefit from on Shabbat? They're two different things. Even if you do the hints and the this and the that, that's only addressing the issue of what do you say on Shabbat. That does not address the entirely separate issue of getting benefit on Shabbat. The basic rule in this chapter is, if someone who is not Jewish does malacha for a Jew, it is forbidden on Shabbat. If he did it for you, it's forbidden. If he did it for himself, then it's permitted. If he did we're speaking about Torah Malachot. If he did something that's derabanan, a rabbinic violation, for you, then you're not allowed to use it, but other Jews would be allowed to use it. If he did it for himself, again, obviously it's going to be fine. If he did something that would be a malacha, but it was actually permitted for him, it would have been permitted for a Jew, it was permitted to ask him to do it, whatever else. For example, it's a sick person and doing malacha on behalf of a sick person. Well, then anyone can use that because it was done permissibly. But if he's doing it for a Jew, then that is going to be problematic. That's the basis of all of this. We'll see the Shulchan Aruch examples and we'll discuss more as well. So he starts off by saying, if a non-Jew lights a candle for a Jew, this is forbidden to everyone, even a new person who comes into the room, right? So we're going to call the guy Chris throughout this. That's a pretty good non-Jewish name, right? So Chris lights the candle for Mark, okay? And Mark says, look, I'm not going to use it. Mark walks out, but Jeff walks in. Jeff says, look, it wasn't lit for me. It was lit for Mark. So I want to use it. No, also no good. The Ramah says there's no difference here whether he's employed by you or not employed by you, right? Since he's doing it for a Jew, no good. If he did it for himself, or if he did it for a sick Jew, where it was halachically justified even to ask him, even if this is not somebody who's going to die, it's just somebody who, somebody's sick and they need hot medicine. So you ask him to turn on the kettle. So that's absolutely fine for somebody who's sick and needs hot medicine. It's saying like, got a bit of a sore throat and it'll make me feel better. So somebody who's sick, if it wasn't Shabbos, you wouldn't go into work. And you need this hot medicine. That's what Dr. Kara said you got to take. So then it's on Shabbos, you can ask the non-Jew to boil the kettle and whatever. Similarly for children, even if they're not so sick. Right? For children, we're more lenient than halakha because we're worried that they might get sick, and we take children's ailments more seriously. In those situations, then any Jew can use in this example, the candle that he lit. Anyone could then use that water. Exactly. So he boils the kettle for the sick person, and then Karen comes along, she wants to make herself a cup of tea. No problem. Still need to use a kli shlishi and that obviously, but the fact that this water was boiled in Shabbat, we view it good example. We view it as if it was done before Shabbos. Or, another example, and it gets more complicated. I'm just going to give an example. He comes in, Chris wants to make himself a cup of tea. It's a full kettle. So he comes in, he boils, he just puts on the kettle anyway, makes himself a cup of tea, walks out. So you come in, so now you want to use that hot water. It's the same principle. Now, it's the same thing he says when you're talking about lighting a candle or whether you're talking about making a fire for somebody who's sick. And he says, some say a fire is no good. Because with a fire, he's going to keep, once he sees that you're coming up to idle with a fire, he's going to keep stoking the fire. But actually says, some say that's no good. And the Mishnah Brura says, but if you know that he doesn't know you and he's not doing it for you, then you don't have to worry. If it could be that he's going to see that you're worried that, okay, so then we enter into that discussion. Now he says, if he did it in your house, you don't need to leave, even though you're getting benefit from it. Now the Mishna Brura clarifies over here, we're speaking in a case where you didn't have a chance to stop him. So it's a dark room. He comes in, he says, oh shame, you're sitting in the dark. Let me light the candle for you. There you have to say, no, please don't. Please don't, it's my Sabbath. Don't do candles. Please don't do it. And to be insistent about it. It's not it's not a question again of, well, what if you hint, what if you that, oh, it's dark in here. It's got nothing to do with that. You're not allowed to have him do malacha for you. It's true that the basis of all of this is that if he does malacha for you, you're going to ask him, but that's the conceptual basis. On a practical level, view them as two totally separate things. By the way, that explains with the sick person as well. Why are you allowed to benefit from the malacha he did for the sick person? Because what are you worried about? That you'll ask him to boil the kettle for another sick person. He's allowed to boil the kettle for another sick person. Right? It's only if he boils the kettle for a well person that we have this concern he's going to end up violating halacha. Okay, so now he says, so again, if he did it already for you, so you don't have to leave. But you're not allowed to dafka use that light. So for example, I couldn't read in this dark. He comes in and turns on the lights, so I can't now pull out a book. But at the same time, I don't have to say, well, before I was in a dark room, I now have to leave and go to another dark room. We don't say that either. So we don't force you to leave, but again, you're not allowed to benefit from it. You heard it.
What about if somebody's sick? So you ask somebody to go and can they then put extra water so there's enough water for you also to
No, that's going to be problematic. And it's going to be the same issue if they're boiling kettle for themselves, but they see that you're around, so they pour in extra water for you. That's also going to be problematic. So that's we'll come to that a little bit later, but there the basic idea is whether you have a friendship with this guy, whether you have some kind of ongoing relationship. Is it the kind of relationship where he wants to do favor, where he's likely to want to help you out? Or is it just you actually don't know each other at all? I mean, you've got nothing to do with one another. Yes.
It's not enough for you to have a cup of tea.
Yes.
Then he goes and adds more, and you still have a cup of tea.
So in other words, there was enough for 2 cups.
1 cup.
But then he
If there was enough for 1 cup, then he's lighting, then he's doing it for himself, and then there's nothing to talk about. Neson's question is there's enough for 2 cups, for him and for you. But he now adds enough water that there's enough for 3 cups. He has his 1 cup and walks away. Yeah, let's leave that for now. Okay. You have, he says, Jews and non-Jews sitting together, and Chris lights the candle. We don't know if Chris was lighting it for the Jews or for the non-Jews or what. So what do? We work out what's the majority. If the majority of people are Jewish, we say he's doing it for the Jews. If the majority of people are not Jewish, he's doing it for the non-Jews. And if it's 50-50, that's also prohibited. Unless we can see that he's just doing it for himself. So he arrives and he says, what's wrong with you guys sitting here in the dark? I want to read my magazine. And he lights the candle and he pulls out his magazine. That would be an example. Okay. Now, this is an important one as well. Some say that you're allowed to tell a non-Jew to light a candle for Shabbat meals. Because this opinion says you're even allowed to ask a non-Jew to do direct Torah melacha for the sake of a mitzvah. And, However, we should go strict on this in a situation where it's not desperately needed, because the majority of halachic authorities disagree with this. He's saying that we're talking here Doraita. So I'm going to clarify the majority opinion and the minority opinion. The majority opinion is that a non-Jew can do a melacha derabanan, can do a rabbinic violation for the sake of a mitzvah for a Jew, not a Torah violation. There is an opinion that he's able to do even a Torah violation. This opinion about the Torah violation is the minority opinion, and therefore we only follow it b'shat hadchak. We only follow it in the tzorech gadol. We only follow it when there's a serious need for it. So, an example of a case where it is permitted: you're living in a place that doesn't have an eruv, you've got small children, and you want to come to shul. You can't push the pram, that's Rabbanan. We don't have a D'oraita Reshut HaRabim. We don't have a Torah public domain. So it's a Karmelit, so it's Rabbanan to take the pram out the house and push it in the road, whatever else. So you're not allowed to do it, but you are allowed to ask a non-Jew to push the pram for you, because you're asking a non-Jew to do a rabbinic violation for the sake of a mitzvah of enjoying Shabbat, or a mitzvah of davening, right? So that would be, everyone agrees that that's okay. That you can go to shul. You are the wife in this scenario. I'm giving the example of a person who wants to go to shul that's got small children. It's a mitzvah. I'm not going to go into the details, but that's. I'm telling you, I'm correct in that. So, the next example. I mean, this was when I lived in Durban. So I was giving a shiur. And I was giving a shiur, but I'd forgotten one of the books that I needed. It was at home. So I asked one of the guys who worked at the shul. I lived very close. I said, will you please come with me? We went back home, got the book out my study. He brought the book to shul so that I could give the shiur. That's another example. But it's the exact same when it comes to the pram for davening, husband or wife. Now he says, however, so now what about this case of the Shabbos meal? So basically, the answer is no. Unless, as he says, there's real compelling reason. Now, the same question comes up with lights in shul. So, if there are no lights in shul, right, so that would seem to be the same kind of problem. However, mitzvah de rabbin, a mitzvah for the whole community, is viewed as having more importance than a personal mitzvah. And therefore, you are allowed to, the Mishna Brura rules, you are allowed to ask the non-Jew to do even a doraita if that's going to allow the community to daven. But, sorry? Aircon's a different story. So let me tell you about LED lights first before we get to aircons. So what's the issue with LED lights? So LED lights is not a Torah violation. Right? LED lights is D'Rabbanan. Electricity is D'Rabbanan. There's no, when it comes to LED lights, there's no cooking, there's no fire. That only comes up in a question when you've got a filament. Maybe the gas tubes, you could have a discussion, but the LEDs is not. So this would be the example. You've got LED lights in your home, and you don't have Shabbos. You don't have, the lights have gone off, so you can't eat your Shabbos meal. There, seemingly, that would be the same as pushing the pram or bringing the book.
But luckily you let your candles.
Say if you want to use the candles, that's fine. Can you use those candles for eating that? Yeah. We just had a whole chapter about whether you can use candles, and I'm asking you, can you use those candles? So the answer is definitely yes. Firstly, because eating is not something that requires that kind of a clear vision the same as reading. And number two, as we said, wax candles are fine. So just testing if you were paying attention. Okay.
But you shouldn't come to talk.
But let's say that, the lights are... So in fact, I was somewhere not too long ago where the candles blew out and the power failed. So that can be... So in that kind of example, as I said, if there are, filament lights, that would be problematic. We view that as being D'Oraita. So we would say you can't even ask a non-Jew to do that. D'Oraita, only for a community. LED lights, it seems to me, check with a greater halachic authority than me, but it seems to me that you could do it. Yes, dear.
Because all of our lights now, it is energy saving lights, which is not it's not.
That's what I'm saying. That's there's difference also in energy saving LEDs and all of that. LEDs are the clearest ones. And the others you have to look into a little bit more. Okay. Now he says, if you say you're going down to your wine cellar to get some wine, and now you have a non-Jewish butler. So you ask your non-Jewish butler to come down with you to get the wine. The only thing is it's pitch black in the wine cellar. So he lights a candle to go with you to go choose the wine. Is that considered okay? Is he doing it for him or for you? He's doing it for you because you want the wine. He doesn't care about the wine.
What happens if you offer him some of the wine?
Now that is a great question. So the Aruch HaShulchan has a story about this. And he says, this is the way we used to do it in Lithuania. And I always quote the story because it teaches you so many things. It teaches the halachot, it teaches you the relationship that they had with the non-Jewish world, it teaches you a lot. He says, what would we do if our lights went out? We would call someone who wasn't Jewish off the street. And we would say, would you like a schnapps? And he would say, yes, I would love a schnapps. So you say, I would love to give you, but it's so dark in the house, I can't find anything. He says, let me come in and light the candle, and then I'll be able to see the schnapps. You say, yeah, with pleasure. So he comes in, and he lights, and he gets himself something to drink, whatever else. He says, do you want me to put it out? You say, no, it's fine, leave it. And he walks out. And then the schnapps says, have a Shabbos meal.
And everyone wins.
Everyone wins. He did not light that candle for you. He's not doing it to do you a favor. He's doing it for himself. But leaving it for you. So that's the example. Now, okay. However, he says you are allowed, if the candle was already lit, you're allowed to then say to your butler, let's go down to the basement. Because all he's really doing is moving the candle. He's not actually, even though we say we don't move candles because of igniting and extinguishing and that kind of thing, which we'll see more about in the next chapter, that's not such a problem for the person who isn't Jewish.
You can't bring a wine unless it's not bush,
That is a good point. That is a good point. That we'll have to see as well. It's also a good point. Also a good point. Good. Okay. Now he says, if I've got a candle lit on my table, and there's another half hour left of this candlelight, and Chris comes in and he lights the second candle, which has now got 2 hours left of light. So what do? You stay there for half an hour. You can carry on reading for half an hour. You can't now, carry on after that time. You just go based on what you had already. And the same thing he says, if you've got like an Aladdin's lamp and he comes and adds more oil to it, you can only go the amount of time that your original candle was going to last. Well, we can't really say because we don't have experience with that, but they could really say. They knew exactly how much it would be. And now he says, and if he comes in to say, look, I'm going to light a second candle, you're allowed to say to him, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah. Now he says, here's an interesting one. He's, the Mishna Brura adds in, what does it mean you're allowed to tell him not to do it? Obviously, you're allowed to tell him not to do it, right? He comes over to your table, he's going to light a candle. Shulchan Aruch says you're allowed to tell him not to light the candle. But that we would have said you have to. So he says, no. What you're allowed to means that you say to him, no, don't light the candle. And he says, I'm lighting it anyway. That means that he's not lighting it for you. He's lighting it for himself. Because you already told him not to. So if you told him not to, and he knows you don't want him to, but he's lighting it anyway, then you know that he's lighting it for himself, and then you would actually be able to use it. Obviously, it's understood. This is not a trick, right? You don't say to Chris before Shabbos, Chris, here's what's going to happen. You're going to come in to light the candle. I'm going to say no. You're going to say yes. You light the candle anyway. Everyone wins. That's not the case that we're talking about. We're talking about where genuinely you say to him, I don't want you to light the candle. And he says, no, I want to light the candle. So then you are allowed. So that's what he means mutar. If you tell him not to and he does anyway, then it's going to be permissible even to use the candle.
If Chris knows that he has to benefit, can he on purpose read a line of a book or something to benefit?
I don't think so, because then again, even the best case scenario, he's lighting it for you and him. Right? With what you're saying. So you and him is also a problem. Yeah.
If you're allowed for 2 hours, you have to allow his life for 2 hours. Your light, or whatever reason goes off, and you stay on the his light.
Say it again, I didn't follow.
Your light is for 2 hours, his light is for 2 hours.
Your light is for how long?
2 hours.
2 hours, and his is for 2 hours.
Your light, or whatever reason goes off.
Yes. No. Yeah, good question. No. In other words, you can't benefit from his light. That's the bottom line. Now, here's another important one. And I'm going to tell you how the Shulchan Aruch says it, and then we'll see how it applies. Just go a little bit further, we'll come back with questions. In the cold countries, you're allowed to tell a non-Jew is allowed to make a fire for children, and adults can warm themselves by the fire. And he's even allowed to light the fire for adults if it's very cold, because everyone is considered sick when it comes to the cold. But this is not like those who give a leniency even though it's not so cold on that day. So what he's clearly saying is, if it's a bit of a chilly day in Cape Town, that is not justification to get him to light. Or if it's winter, so you say, oh, well, because it's winter we can light. No, it doesn't work like that. However, if it is properly cold, if it's a bit cold, then you can light the fire for children. And if it's properly cold, you can light the fire even for adults. Now, how cold is properly cold?
-10.
So does it have to be sub-zero?
Yes.
So, to give a very practical example, a Joburg winter. Joburg winter, 8 degrees.
Easy.
Right? So are you allowed to ask him to light the fire when it's 8 degrees? Right? When it's -20, obviously, right? -10 even, obviously you're allowed to. What about when it's 8 degrees? For children, definitely you can. What about for adults? So I will prove to you that for adults you can also. Because when we were at Yeshiva, so on Shabbos, one Shabbos, we were sitting there at the shiur with Rabbi Galvan. It was a cold winter's day. It wasn't below zero. It was probably like 8-9 degrees. And Rabbi Galvan said, Joseph, please light the oven. And at that point, they've since expanded, but at that point the dining room was the kitchen, was the shiur room. So that was where we had the... So he said, Joseph, please turn on the oven. It was an oven that cooked all the food and provided a lot of heat. It was a fire. It was an oven that worked on a gas fire. He says, Joseph, please light the oven. And warm up. He did that a few times. That was in a Joburg winter. So that was not in a Montreal winter, right, or a Vilna winter, but it wasn't in a Durban winter.
Just to clarify, by that Joseph was a Jewish name, but then not.
That's Joseph Makwaza.
Joseph was could be Jewish,
Yeah, he wasn't.
but he was.
Yeah. Yeah. You heard her.
I thought you said to that that you can't benefit from the non-Jewish life. I thought if he did it for himself, he could benefit from the non-Jewish life.
So the case that we were talking about, the understanding was that he's lighting it for you. It's just that you already have a candle on the table, so you don't have to leave, but you can't then use his just because you already had one of your own.
What happens if it's better place for you to read anything?
No, that's a good example of where you can't. Yeah, we're talking about you're right. We're only talking about where he's lighting it for you.
So if you want to light, you don't have to leave.
If he lit it for himself,
If he lit it for you, if let's say
he lit it for you, but you still got your candle going.
the light on our hand went out.
You don't have to leave, but you can't read by that candle. You can't do stuff that you couldn't have done in the dark. Yeah. Good. So that's the end of that chapter. And as I said, that's a very important chapter. Any other questions on that before we go further?
So why were you allowed to switch on the stove when it's 8 degrees?
Because it's cold.
But you can put on the jersey and look very
Firstly, everyone already had jerseys on. 8 degrees is cold. 8 degrees is not warm, right? Everyone had jerseys on. Rabbi Galfan held that was the cold level that's mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch doesn't give you Celsius degrees. So I'm showing you that Rabbi Galfan held that a Joburg winter also counts. Doctor, what? So with air cons, it's a different issue. With air cons, it's not a case of the cold.
It's not.
It's the heat. Now the heat Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention, and heat generally is not as problematic as cold, unless you're talking, really extreme heat and you're outside or whatever else. I don't think you're going to sweat there. Go get a glass of water. You know what I'm saying? It's not. That's not such a problem. However, with air cons, that's the Rabbanan again,
What happens if you
right? Air cons is just electricity.
So can a non-Jew light not for their benefit, purely for their benefit?
So certainly, if it's for a community davening, give me an example. Came up this Shabbos yesterday. Yesterday, the aircon went off. So somebody came to said, "Can we ask Frank, who isn't Jewish, to turn on the aircon, So I didn't want to just give the ruling. I checked with Rabbi Altman that he concurred, and he said, he thinks Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says it explicitly. So there we got it. For a private home, it's a good question. It seems to me it would be the same as the LED lights and that. It's going to help you enjoy Shabbos, but you've got to work out to what extent, you know. Just open the doors. Is it enough of from no lights to light, from being at home to being able to go to shul? Those are substantial improvements to your Shabbat experience. Aircon, you have to look at it. But for a community, it certainly can be. Who says that?
And why you feel heat more than cold?
Yeah.
You can't get on the place or cold. You can put on the shoes.
Yeah, you can wear natural fibers for the heat also. I grew up in Durban. I'm not scared of the heat. Okay. Next chapter, 277. So he says, a candle. Okay, now we're talking about the topic of this chapter is candles and concern of blowing them out or creating airflow that's going to now create impact on these candles. So candles sitting behind the door, you're not allowed to open the door normally because the wind could come and blow it out. You are allowed to close the door because that's not creating more airflow. Same thing with a window. If it's similarly, if it's like set in the wall behind the door, you've got the same problem. You're there even more. Maybe the door itself could actually hit it. So what you do is you would very gently open and close. In other words, be mindful of the fact that you have this candle and you've got to be careful about it. No, not when it's attached. The next halakha is when it's attached to the door. Here it's talking like just behind the door, just inside. Yeah. Well, no, we're talking normal wind. Yeah, we'll see about big wind as well in a minute. But you got on your entrance table. On your entrance table, you got candles. Gently open. Yeah, exactly. But you can't like open it right up because then it could blow out the candle. That's what you got to be concerned about. If it's in the door itself, that he says when you open or close it, that now starts fueling the fire or not fueling the fire, whatever else. He says then you're not even allowed to open and close that door at all. However, that's speaking like again more about it like an Aladdin's lamp. If we're talking about a wax candle, that's not such a problem. You're not allowed to open the door similarly by a bonfire, which is close to the door, and even if it's just a regular wind, that's the point that we see. But if again it was already open, you're allowed to close it. And we're not worried that you're now cutting off the oxygen supply or whatever else. We've got a fire running in the, got a fire, that you lit Erev Shabbos in the lounge or the living room, right, in your fireplace, and you're now worried about opening and closing. So he says, if it's too close to it, then that's going to be a problem. But but you're allowed to close the door, that's fine. And if you left a candle on a tray, Erev Shabbat. Okay. So now there's two issues we need to understand with candles. The one is moving a lit candle on Shabbat. Yes or no? No, lit candle. Why not?
It could go out.
Yeah.
You can't extinguish
It's not just that it could go out, but by moving, yes, Jay?
By moving, you're heading them off.
That's it. By moving it, you are disturbing the flow of wax to the wick, right? Of fuel to the fire. You are either extinguishing it or igniting it, or you're messing with it. So that's no good.
But
Less or more, right? Or but you're shifting it. You're shifting the fuel source.
Many are going to be even seen it on Yom Kippur when all the separate toilets are out and they put a candle in the oven.
But that's still not Yom Tov. That's all still before Yom Tov. Yom Kippur.
No, they leave it on Yom Kippur.
On Yom Kippur?
Yeah.
When?
It's after when Yom Kippur comes in already.
Are you sure? Because Kol Nidra is still not Yom Kippur yet.
But it's after Shkia.
It's after the time that we tell people.
Yeah.
It's not after Shkia. Kol Nidra has to be before Shkia.
Yeah, but once you put the separate back in.
Probably still not Yom Tov yet. If you're moving around candles, it wouldn't be Yontif.
And then you take it off?
On Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre is done before Yom Kippur. Once it's Yom Kippur, you can't do Kol Nidre anymore. Kol Nidre is done before Yom Kippur. So I'm sure that would be the case as well. Yeah, it's very problematic to move candles. Now the next thing is, even if the candle is not lit anymore, if it was lit when Shabbat comes in, it's muktzah. Because since it was lit at the time that Shabbos came in, that candle became muktzah for the whole rest of Shabbos. So now I've got a situation like this. I was rushing around, I left the lit candle on my special tray, and I forgot about it. Shabbos came in, 10 minutes later the candle just blew out. But now I want to now move this tray around or that kind of thing. So now the problem is that the candle's muktzah. The tray isn't muktzah because I didn't leave it on there on purpose. If I left it on that tray on purpose, and the tray itself would also become muktzah, it's what's called a basis, that it acts as like a base for the muktzah. But here I didn't put it on purpose. So the tray is not muktzah, but the candle's muktzah. But now I want to use this tray. So he says, what you do is, you can take the tray, and the candle ends up falling off by itself. But then he says, so I need the tray. Well, let's say that's what I'm taking to my hosts for lunch tomorrow or whatever. Yeah. Now, then he says something which seems to contradict our general attitude towards candles, and you have to look into this more. I don't really understand how this all comes together. But he says, even if the candle is still lit, just try not to put it out. In other words, I pick up the tray with the lit candle on, just tip it onto somewhere else. Just try not to extinguish it. Now, we just said you're not allowed to move candles around, but in this situation, he seems to say it's okay. And the Ramah says it's better to get a non-Jew to do it for you. Okay.
On the candle that's not lit, if that candle that you falls on a white sheet, the
Yeah.
burns, whatever you call it, the stick, the wick.
Yes.
That will make them off.
Yeah.
Then you make them off.
Yeah, so you want to avoid, well, I'd say there's a fire hazard there, which is also problematic. So you want to make sure that it's not in a way that it's definitely going to. Now, what he does say, and this could shed light on this whole candle story as well, he does say, there's a difference here between a wax candle and, again, the Aladdin's lamp. The Aladdin's lamp is more problematic. The Aladdin's lamp is more, changeable, volatile. The Aladdin's lamp is more volatile. Carrying it around changes the flow a lot more, whereas a candle's more stable. So it could be this whole thing of you're not allowed to move a candle around that actually could just be with an Aladdin's lamp. And with a wax candle, it might not be such an issue. Okay. So now he says, however, again, you're allowed to move the tray itself, because that was never designated as the base for these candles. And similarly, you're allowed to touch the shul candelabras as long as you don't move them. And what he's pointing out here is another rule in muktzah, that muktzah is not a rule that you're not allowed to touch something. Muktzah is a rule that you're not allowed to move something. So you're allowed to touch a car, you're allowed to touch a cell phone, you're allowed to do all of that. The problem is you're not allowed to move them.
What's the definition of moving? Lifting?
No, even a little bit of moving. So they say, example, an egg, a raw egg. A raw egg is muktzah. Or let's say an egg that was laid that day is muktzah. So an egg, you're not even allowed to touch it. Why? Because if you touch it, you move it. Right? But a tree, you're allowed to touch because they're a big tree. Because touching it is not moving it.
So turning a regular lamp away from your bed, it's in your eyes and you can't sleep.
So that's a different thing because there you are moving it.
So you can't.
No, I didn't say that. Then you get into more complicated questions of muktzah, but that's different to what we've said up until now. Yeah, so that's a good question, and we asked Chief Rabbi Goldstein about it when he taught us halakha at Yeshiva. But that answer would have to give more background about muktzah, which we're not going to go into now.
With the phone, let's say for some reason it's
You're saying to use it. Using it is a problem. That's a separate problem. Using it's a different problem to. No, it's not yet. Yeah. But that's yeah. I mean, okay. Now he says. Yes, yeah, that's a good point. So he goes into that a little bit as well. The idea there is if you don't want it to become a base for the candle. So even though I'm leaving it there, Erev Shabbat, with the intention of this, guys, so I make it a base for something more valuable than the candle as well. So I make it both a tray for the candle and a tray for my jewelry. Now my jewelry is more important than the candle, so that becomes primarily a base for the candle, and it also ends up, primarily a base for the jewelry, and it also ends up a little bit for the candle. So that's a way of ensuring that it doesn't become a base for the candle. Okay. Now he says you're allowed to, you want to have, let's say you want to eat in your courtyard and you've got trees overlooking your courtyard and you want to put candles in the trees, right? To make, won't that be beautiful? He says that's fine. You don't have to worry that you're going to end up taking the candles back at the end of the evening, or your Aladdin's lamps or whatever else. You don't have to worry you're going to end up taking it back at the end of the evening. You're not going to be moving it around on Shabbos. However, on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to, because Yom Tov, you can move these things around. And therefore, you might end up climbing the tree to take those off. You're not allowed to move, use and move trees and whatever else. Okay. And then he says, you're allowed to put a bowl over a candle on Shabbat so that stuff doesn't catch fire.
But if you put a bulb over a candle, then wouldn't it go out?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at here, and it seems no. That's how he seems to be. That's what he seems to be saying. In other words, the point is, this is really another discussion as well, also related to muktzah. There's an idea of moving something for the sake of a muktzah thing. Right? So, for example, I've got my phone sitting somewhere. So, I can't move my phone on Shabbat. That's muktzah. But what I want to do is I'm worried that people are going to come play with it. So, I want to go get a bowl and put that over my phone. So, that's also problematic because even though I'm not moving the muktzah, I'm moving something for the sake of the muktzah. That can also be problematic. So, he wants to know, is that a problem over here? And he says, no, that's not a problem. Because since... Yeah, that's not a problem. No, Shabbos lamps are different issue. Because he says we don't have a problem. Because this concern that I said, moving the bowl for the sake of the phone, moving this for the sake of the phone, he says that's not a problem. Muktzah means you can't move the item. It doesn't mean you can't move something else for this item. So we'll do that in more detail when we do the laws of Muktzah. Muktzah is really coming in tangentially here. Chapter 278. Extinguishing a fire for a sick person. Where do we learn about this? In Bameh Madlikin. You're allowed to extinguish a fire so that a mortally ill person, a seriously life and death person, can sleep. However, the Mishna Brura points out, this is not your first choice. There's easier ways often to avoid this. For example, move the sick person to a different room, right? Or so then move the candle. There's a few ideas that we can come up with over here. You can move the person, you can move the candle, you can cover the candle a little bit, right? There's all kinds of things. So the point that he makes is, the Mishnah Brura says, fine. We're talking about a case where you can't do anything like that. I'll give you a good example. In hospital, right? Got a guy seriously in a hospital. Doctor says he needs a dark room, but it's already light, so Shabbos is in. And the nurse is Jewish. Is she allowed, to switch off the lights? You can't take him out, put him somewhere else. It's a hospital. Everywhere there's somebody, right? And you can't move the candle. So that would be a good example where you would switch it off. That's the whole of chapter 278. You're allowed to put out the candle for a sick person. 279, moving a candle around on Shabbat. A candle that was lit on Shabbat. Even once it's gone out, it's muktzah, like we mentioned. and so too the oil that remains in there is also muktzah. So again, you're talking about an Aladdin's lamp with olive oil inside. So we don't say you can use the rest of that olive oil for your salad dressing. Once that oil was set aside for this candle, then it's forbidden. And it's a high level of muktzah. I don't want to go into too much detail on that. Okay. Then he goes into other things, and this really, I think we would need to dedicate more time to muktzah to really do it justice. He speaks about moving it together with something else, a little bit like what Jacques was saying about the ring. You know, when you've got two things together and you're moving two things together, that can sometimes be. He also talks about making conditions. That what if you would say, I'm lighting this candle on condition that when it goes out, it won't be muktzah. Does that work? Because then you've set it aside to move it after it goes out. You're saying with the stones. So the problem is that the stones were designated from before Shabbat. Whereas here, it is going to be muktzah, and now you want it to become unmuktzah. Yeah, that's the... So the Shulchan Aruch says that's fine, but the Ramah says that's no good. If a candle was lit for this on Shabbat, if the candle was lit on Shabbat for the sake of a sick person or something like that, and then it goes out, then it's not muktzah. Because muktzah is when it was muktzah when Shabbat came in. And in this situation, it was never muktzah when Shabbat came in. Okay, let's just see a little bit more on this. Okay, he speaks about menorahs that you put together and take apart. We won't go into that. And 280 is not for children. 281, he goes back more into the Shabbos davening. And 282 into Torah reading. Unfortunately, we didn't get all the way through to 285, but that's what we'll get up to. We'll get up to 282, that it's about Torah reading and maftir on Shabbat and how it works with 7 people and adding extra, not adding extra, maftir of Torah, how does all of that go? Please God, we will see more of that next time.